Hello, welcome to EMD Media. EMD Media is working on understanding, measuring, and doing. This is your host, Getachew Asafa, and today we are live on Facebook and YouTube on conversation with Joanne Hodges, a Canadian woman with Tigray royal heritage, and we'll be talking about the humanitarian aspect of the war on Tigray that started on November 4. For those of you who are following us on Facebook, please share and like. And those of you who are following us on YouTube live, please subscribe if you haven't done that, so that YouTube can share it and recommend it to many viewers. And this is again your host, Getachew Asafa with UMD Media. UMD Media strives for evidence-based discourse and decision making. And we are live on Facebook and YouTube with my guest today, Joanne Hodges from Toronto. And welcome to the show, Joanne.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And happy Easter, Malcolm Fasika.
To you as well. Happy Easter. This is the best holiday.
It is. And specifically in these tough times, we want to think about the good in life and the second chance, second life, and so on.
Exactly. And I don't think I know of any better comfort than knowing that you serve a king who says he sees all and he offers forgiveness and promises justice. So I think
That's right. That's exactly. And maybe, we can talking about Easter. Um, I always say, I have two chances, right? The Canadian Easter and
yes.
Ethiopian Easter, Canadian Christmas, Ethiopian Christmas, and so on. So, have you ever been in Tigray or in Ethiopia in general for Easter?
Yeah, actually, I was a few years ago. I don't remember how many years ago it was now, but I had like a day full of eating food after.
The roads?
Yeah, it was quite a feast. I remember my grandma was still alive, and she had lined up, I don't know, 3 or 4 houses for me to go to, and I didn't realize they would be serving food at every single one of them. So by the end of the day, I was like, people were getting like handfuls ready to bless me, and I was like, I can't do it
Yeah.
yeah.
I know, especially for those of who fasted for, let's say, 55 days.
Yeah.
And then that day is a heavy day of, eating anything everywhere. And
Yes.
yeah.
A lot of
Okay,
fun
great.
though. Yeah.
Yeah, we will be spending maybe an hour or so on a vast, variety of issues. But first, who is John Hodges? My viewers definitely will ask, who is she? So
Yeah.
if you can introduce her, then we'll share with them some images and pictures as well.
Sure. Yeah. Well, maybe I should warn you first and say that I'm gonna self-identify as Tigrayan, partly, and I know that's shocking to a lot of people. They don't necessarily associate people with my skin tone as being Tigrayan, but my grandmother is, and my father was born and raised in Ethiopia, and so my connection is really through them and through my grandmother. Um, I've been a documentary filmmaker, and I have done some work. I founded a nonprofit organization called Good Evidence that was an anti-oppression, pro-media literacy nonprofit that actually came out of my experience growing up in a mixed race family in Ontario, and the perceptions people held of Ethiopia, really the misconceptions, the sort of stereotypes about famine and semi-arid deserts for forever and babies with flies on their faces and things like that. But so we work towards sort of creating alternative narratives for many different misrepresented communities. But that has since closed. Our board, we were doing some really interesting things, but we didn't do succession planning very well. So that's kind of a past project, but one I still care deeply about. The issues are all very important to me. So yeah, and my grandmother, yes, she comes from a long line of the House of Agame in Tigray. Her yeah, there's the list.
Yeah, we'll walk us through that. I mean, the viewers are seeing that, but yeah.
Well, it goes even back before that, but there's a lot of Shomogame people, leaders on this. They what did I say? I think it was we were able to confirm that it was like about 174 years of continuously somebody from the family being in a leadership position somehow in the Agame region. So it was a long legacy until I think it was 1974 when the revolution happened.
Yeah.
Sort of, yeah.
The Emperor Haile Selassie, yeah.
Yeah, so somebody in the family was doing something. I heard I mean, the list, I could regale you with stories from each of them, but it would be a long, because that's what my grandma would do.
Yeah.
But that would be the show. We would be like, oh, right, wrap it up. But they each have their own individual, legacies, stories, characteristics that were admirable. I think particularly today, there are aspects of Rasapat, that are how would I put it? He is a good role model for today. If I can back up for 1 second, I think that sometimes we think that it's not okay because of the great humanitarian suffering that's going on. I think sometimes we think that we can't, or we shouldn't look away from the suffering that's currently happening to talk about our past and our history or our heritage, and that it's just our heritage. But actually, talking about our stories and our history, I think is incredibly important. I'm friends with a trauma therapist who's done some work with Tigrayans, Brent Diaz, and he works with survivors of rape from Rwanda, from the Yazidi culture, and then now he's volunteering to do some work with Tigrayans. And he's talked about one of the ways that we shore up resiliency is by remembering who we are and where we come from and what our previous stories were. And so I think about moments in our history, Tigrayan history, that we have shown to be tenacious, persistent, very aware of our own value and worth. And I think that there are certain individuals, like, I'm very familiar with my family history, so those are some of my anecdotes, I would say. But Rasapat is one of those characters that I think is worth looking at. He did a lot. He lived through a time that was called the bad times.
Yeah.
And there was similar things going on where Tigray was being, not allowed any food, essentially. Trade was cut off. And Tigray needs to be able to trade, needed at that time to be able to do that. And they were having a very difficult time. There were also armed bandits everywhere across Tigray at the time. And so one of the things he did was he snuck across enemy lines, disguised as a wealthy businessman. And he bought a ridiculous amount of food, from what I'm told from elders, and brought it back to Tigray. And under the cover of night, beside a church, he would distribute it to families. And then he would send home at one armed guard with each family as they went home with the food, as a way of, providing for his people. And I think about that, innovation, resiliency, humility in many ways of doing, and self-sacrifice. It's really admirable. And I know that I was told many times in Adigrat that I don't think I've heard any of them, but there are songs and poems. I know a couple of the poems. I have them documented, but that they are still sung about him, remembering him for that season and that time and what he did. So there's things like that. He was also else was so great. He
John, what was the time? Was it around the great famine or all that, or?
It was the late 1800s and
Yeah.
early 1900s. Yeah, that he was. Oh yes, so he also granted women the right to own property in that same time. Yeah, and in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that's kind of a significant thing. And believing that all men and women should have the ability to provide for themselves, essentially. Yeah, and he also, he was set on peace. He really wanted peace for Agame, kind of at all costs. He had this respect for human life. So if he had to do something like, unfortunately, sometimes I guess they had to do in those times, execute somebody or something like that, or he was going to war or something. I'm told that whenever he had some sort of a grave, gruesome thing he had to do like that, he would isolate himself for 3 days and not eat anything and pray and make peace with his maker. There was this, beautiful, respect for humans and humanity and just life and the sanctity of life. And then even with the Battle of Adwa, there's people who are more familiar with the story might. Well, he was in Adigrad at the time, and the Italians came to Adigrad, and Sabhat had told Menelik that he needed reinforcement in order to hold Adigrad, and unfortunately, the reinforcement didn't come. So instead of having a bloodbath, he allowed the Italians to come to Adigrad, but then he ended up, because of that, he ended up attaining so much information about the Italians and how they were conducting themselves. And he even sent people to go spy and all these different things. And then he was able to defect, obviously, and go back to Menelik. And so he participated in the Battle of Adwa and brought very essential information that helped them in their battle. So what do we learn from something like that? I think, that if whatever it is you've had to do to survive, you don't have to lose yourself, and don't underestimate what you have learned along the way. You can utilize things. So I just think of him very, as one of those great icons where Tigray has seen trying times before, but we innovate, we rise to the occasion. They're resilient, fiercely independent. He's one of those.
It makes a lot of sense that we talk about that today. Like you said, the famine, the locust at that time, the war, even if it was a different type of war, made Tigray at that time vulnerable for everything. And for those who are not maybe connecting the dots, Ras Sabhat was the contemporary of Ras Alula. That's at the same time and so on. So people actually say that time changed the course of history when it comes to Ethiopia, to Tigray. And we are at a time where course of history will be for sure changing, one way or another. So after us, Sabhat, we have Shum Agame Dista, and then Fitor Asbahak and Buzunesh. Maybe we will talk about this on a separate.
Sure.
Sure.
But Agatis could have his own show. I think he's got
exactly.
The other ones, there's some things about them. But my grandmother, she was such a such an icon to me. I would go every year or two to hang out with her and learn from her. From I think 2002 was the first year that I actually went. she did come to Canada for a while when I was a younger. So let me back up a bit, I guess, with her. She was born in Ottawa. She at a very young age, her parents wanted to marry her off to a rival family as a way of creating some sort of peace. She's the only descendant of Casa and Atzbaha, direct descendant. She had 2 half brothers and a half sister, but she was sort of the one that was from those 2, Casa and Atzbaha. And so this was supposed to be this big peaceful thing, but she was so independently minded that she ran away just before the wedding was supposed to happen and caused her family great shame. She ran to Addis Ababa and she stayed with some family friends that were there. They owned, I don't remember what their industry was totally, but they did own some restaurants. And so my grandmother, she spent a couple of years there. I think she was only like 13, so she spent a couple of years there and then started to work in one of these restaurants. And then very quickly she managed the restaurant, and then she owned the restaurant, and then she owned several restaurants. And so she had this little mini empire of restaurants and bars and nightclubs across Ethiopia, Eritrea at the time. I think her favorites were, she had a place called the John F. Kennedy nightclub in Addis Ababa. And she loved the Blue Nile bar in Asmara. That was sort of, I think, where she really set up most of her life. She liked being close to Massawa and to be close to the sea. And so she lived a lot of her adult life in Asmara. But then with Mengistu, I think, there was some point where she was well connected enough that she was given a 48-hour warning to get out of the country, essentially, or she was going to be in trouble. And so my dad had already come to Canada for school.
After the revolution? After the revolution?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, sometime after, I think. So yeah, my dad was already here. My aunt was here. They were studying at school, so the place she came was here, and she lived here until the 90s. In Toronto, and then she returned as things became more peaceful again. And one of the reasons she wanted to go back was to reclaim her old properties. She had to leave very quickly and sort of sign things off to different people, saying, "You take care of this, you take care of that," whatever. And yeah, so the biggest challenge, I think, for her in her later life was the ridiculous process that the government put her through trying to reacquire her property. And she spent a long, like over 20 years in Adigrad, partly because she loves Adigrad, partly because she wanted to be close to where her mother came from and her father, and was trying to reconnect she with that history, but also really she was trying to reclaim these properties, and the government and the court system gave her this runaround. She really struggled with it, where they wanted her to bribe them, essentially, right? And I was there sometimes where, they said, "Oh, this, property is supposed to be given to you, but one judge needs to sign one document one additional time. And now he's on vacation and he's not coming back for 3 weeks. So sorry about that." And it was just thing after thing like that, where it's like, it's just, and, it was obvious what was wanted, but she wouldn't do it. She does not, she was very principled about certain things especially in her later years. I can't speak to what she was like when she was younger, but I knew her in her later years, and she just would not have it. So she knew she was due these properties. But it meant for a long battle for her, and a long season of trying to acquire those properties again. Thankfully, but just before the war, actually last year, some of them had finally been settled again and things like that. So, but now, who knows?
Yeah.
what will happen after
Exactly.
this all settles down. So so that's a bit about her. She was a fierce person. She had strong opinions, very witty, very funny, a wonderful human. I miss her terribly, but I'm also quite glad that she's not around to witness what's happening in Tigray right now. I think, I was drawn to her because I saw so much strength and dignity in her, and yeah. Yeah, she loved Ethiopia, really loved Tigray, loved jazz music, and that history. It's a really, really wonderful person.
Yeah. When did you first go to Tigray to reconnect and to find out? I saw there is a clip. I will just play it briefly, but you made a documentary actually on Ethiopian princess.
Yes, blog.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did that in I think that was 2005. So I went the first time in 2002 with my aunt, who was going back for the first time in a long time to reconnect with her. And I got a sense of who my grandmother was sort of then as an older person myself. Not a child, not in the same capacity. I guess it was a teenager when I went back. But yeah, and then in 2005, I thought I really wanted to go back just myself to better understand her history, what it was she was doing there, really. Like, why stay? What was the draw? And so I brought a cameraman with me, and we just sort of he followed me around as I interacted with things for the first time. My family kind of took me on, and my grandmother, as well as a couple of other family members, to educate me about the history, the House of Agame history, and the different sites that existed. And my grandmother's vision, she really wanted to somehow preserve just a bit of the legacy, and celebrate it as an important part of the regional history. But how to do that was sort of always up in the air. So my a couple of family members helped me by saying, these are all the sites you need to go to. Here's the history in these places. One of them was to go, we went to like an old crumbling castle that was in the north, closer to Zalembasa. Then there was, they wanted me to go to Gunda to see.
Maybe time to play that a bit
Sure.
so that our viewers get some idea on that. Yeah. Right.
It would be a tough trip when the priests in Adigrad were so surprised to hear I was going. 5 hours of walking in the blazing midday sun along some of the most remote, treacherous, and breathtaking terrain is not what I had been expecting. Locals believed an invasion was imminent, and there was fear of more looting. Out of respect, they carried all of their most sacred items here to keep them safe. When we finally arrive, I'm not allowed to enter. The monastery is for men only, and they would not believe that I was related to the kings who were buried inside. Tadise had evidently forgotten to give me an official letter from the church stating who I was, and I didn't know that I needed a letter. My exhaustion and frustration. The embalmed bodies of several of my forefathers lay in these boxes, and there was a graveyard filled with more relatives. Every body of every king was carried here through the mountains, carefully lowered with ropes over the edges of cliffs. For all the trouble that the priests caused me, I'm glad that they protect my family so well. I ask for water for the...
I love many lines that you included here, including protecting the family and so on. So can you speak to that moment where you went there in Gundagundo and you met the past and the present, so to speak?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was a beautiful experience. I mentioned it, and I really my family, when they told me to go, they said, "Oh, you're going like down a hill and up a hill and down a hill, and then you walk for a while, and then you're there." So I was not expecting like mountains. Like this is what the actual so I was not prepared for that.
Right.
So by the time we got there, it was a bit like this was a longer trek than I thought it was going to be. But it was such a beautiful experience to sort of walk up, through this valley to all of a sudden see this beautiful monastery, and you hear sort of those chimes and things, and people come out to greet us, and yeah, and to know that that part of that journey that it's intention like how I say, it's intentionally difficult to get to, right? It's intentionally difficult to get to in order to preserve it. Gunda was created, I think it was was it the 14th or the 15th century, something like that, with
14.
from people who were fleeing persecution, and so they was this intentional sort of creation of a place where you could store sacred items. I know it still holds one of I think the largest volumes of his manuscripts is found in there. There's like over 200 of them, which outside of Addis is kind of rare. And yeah, and so yeah, just a beautiful, peaceful place to go, and just the carefulness with which everyone. They didn't know who I was. And who's going to believe that someone who looks like me also? I understood them, getting there. After I got there, I went, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, that if I had a letter or I had something, you would maybe believe me. Why would you believe me otherwise? And there was no cell service at the time either, so I couldn't call somebody and be like, hey.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so I was stuck outside. But even then, the priest sat with me, and they brought me food and told me stories and hung out, and and it was a beautiful experience to be there. And actually, I mean, one of the things that struck me the most also was it's in the Iro community, and of course the wonderful. I mean, this is true everywhere I've been in many ways in Tigray, but the beautiful, wonderful sharing of self and space. I mean, we ended up sleeping in somebody's house because it was too late for us to go back the whole way. And the warmth of the community and welcoming was really, it always stood out to me how even, with abject poverty and very difficult life circumstances, the warmth, not because you're a certain person, but just because you're traveling through, it was always struck me as really beautiful.
Yeah, you mentioned about how Gundo was established by people who are in the 14th century, the 15th century as well, who were prosecuted, by the government and, of the time and so on. That is a good connection to where we are now. And maybe we can talk about that now, given that what we see in Tigray. So we'll be back and forth to your family and to your connection in Tigray. But talking about the war on Tigray that starts on November 4th.
Yeah.
How about for you, the days, the weeks and months maybe before the war? Were you, seeing this coming, or it was just on the news suddenly for you?
No, I think that I heard concerns even from the time that Abiy took office, and I remember some of the things that happened after. Even there was like some concerned conversation I heard after the peace deal that was struck because of how it was struck, and yeah, and I mean, Tigray has had a contentious relationship with ISIS, so there was always going to be a higher risk of things escalating somehow. I think because of it, having it start is still shocking. I think that, well, maybe not that it started, or even because the tensions were brewing between the Tigray leadership and Abiy for quite a while. But I think what was really shocking is the depth of the suffering that was caused, the amount of destruction, the intentional, the concerted effort to destroy, I think, the civilian population, families, essentially, right? To target an entire province of people for the decisions of the leaders is surprising still to me in some ways, that there would be that depth of it. I mean, historically that's happened, so it shouldn't be so surprising. That's certainly happened before with Tigray. But to get to a place where you have 4.5 million people needing emergency food aid, you have weaponized rape that's genocidal in nature, you have weaponized hunger, you have the destruction of the livelihoods of people, the threatening of farmers who are trying to sow and support themselves right now. The intentional destruction of water facilities, the cutting down of mango trees, all of what's going on. This it's a real and the freezing of bank accounts and the communication blackout. It is such a complex, concerted effort to destroy an entire people, and I think that is not something that I thought was going to happen. So it's the now to be in a position where yes, so with Tigray's history and its relative food insecurity, there was going to have to be, because of the locust invasion, 1.2 million people who were going to have to receive food aid. But to get to 4.5 million people is intentional. Ethiopia is well organized, and because of the famines in the 80s, they studied how to avoid famine in the future. And so to be now in a position where 4.5 million people need emergency food aid, it can only be described as an intentional act. So when you have aid organizations on the ground who have extensive experience delivering aid to war-torn countries like Yemen and Syria and Afghanistan, and they can do this, they can deliver the aid, and to have people dying of hunger is inexcusable. So full unrestricted access to every corner of Tigray has to be granted in order for this to be addressed. We're not here by mistake. To have over 1 million people internally displaced, ethnic cleansing in the West,
You're mentioning about this happened before to Tigray, and that clearly is what connects this to the Stephanites, to the Gundagundo. I remember some weeks ago reading the book, one of the books by one of these children of Stephan or the Stephanites.
Yeah.
Mentioning that I think for 30 years they couldn't appoint their own priest. They couldn't get, because of this punishment from the central government. And one of the fathers says that now Ethiopia has left us. Can we go to Egypt, to the Coptic church? And so on. So he was asking for permission. So this is verbatim from that book. So when you connect that, this has been coming and going and so on, but the scale, forces involved, the all kinds of atrocities, and we know only the tip of the iceberg, right? We don't have even full information yet. But what you are mentioning in terms of 4.5 million people needing emergency food, the weaponized rape, the refugees, some of them, around 27% of these refugees are children. And there was a data showing that around 100 kids, went there without any adult with them. and so on. So the scale, I mean, do we know if there was something like that elsewhere of this scale, specifically when central government, federal government, working with other governments to, do all these atrocities against own people? Any precedents we know of?
Yeah, well, I do think of it. I'm not sure about how they used other governments at the same time with, but when you're referring to Stephanos, I think that there are parallels. Definitely, you can draw there where if you're not familiar with who Stephanos was, he was considered he's considered a heretic, but he was also kind of considered the first African Protestant. He really had. And actually, we call him the first African Protestant, but it was 70 years before the Reformation in Europe that he had these ideas of that you're saved by grace alone, ideas about the Trinity, and what was there was another one. It's slipping my mind. I don't know if you remember. So he had theological differences, but I think it's the effect of the societal ramifications from those theological differences that I think are what was really feared. And because of his, he questioned authority. He advocated for his for people to not bow before the emperor or to venerate anyone other than God. And that was especially, I think, offensive to the emperor at the time, who used to himself be a religious man, and so he really took offense to his perspective. He advocated against the Solomonic line, and so because he was questioning power and where power is located and how we identify ourselves, he attracted a great number of people who felt like they were oppressed by powerful people, and they unified with him. And the response from the emperor was just punishing. It was horrific. The things they intentionally were trying to scare people away from aligning with him, because of the danger, I think, that they perceived that he posed and his positions posed. So there, the accounts of what was done to the people who followed are horrible, of like limbs being cut off and tongues being cut off and skin being peeled off, and all of these things that are just, when you think about them, are horrific. But they were done to a large number of people. And in Tigray, and it was because of their questioning where power should lie, essentially, and how you align your own beliefs, right?
But you know what? That reminded me of this paper by Professor Getachew Haile. I don't know if it's if our viewers can see it. So this is from 1983. Getachew Haile is a professor, a very good expert in these areas, in the manuscripts of Ethiopia and so on. So in this paper from 1983, yet there are people who say, the Stephanites and the Stephanos, they were heretics and so on. The issue he mentioned, but in his research, he's clearly saying that at no time did the church, excommunicate them, or even say that they have religious differences or dogmatic references. So the main issue, the problem they faced, was simply because, like you said, they questioned authority. They spoke to power. All that was a coverage, because to convince the church, the clergy, and so on, the king, emperor, the Jacob, he had to use the religion card and so on. So This is a well-documented research, published in this. I think it's in Forbes Institute. And one interest point there, though, is uh, this Dekika Stefano. They didn't only caution the authority in the palace. They also were against the how the church was using, this political power to control land, around the monasteries and so on. So these were, reformist, I would say, where they saw the poor is at the, receiving end of all this power struggle and so on. So,
Yeah.
and I remember you can elaborate on that more, where they were first, before they cut off, their nose and limbs and so on, they were sending them to the lowlands so that they could be killed or punished by, those living in that lowland area. But immediately all the poor, the oppressed, the people identify themselves in them.
Yes.
And it was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the powerful. It was a popular movement, like in that sense. Like people recognize the value of the criticism and what it could do for their lives, I think. And so they did attract people quite easily. I think that, and they lasted quite a while too. It was like 100 years or something.
Yes.
Before it was actually really stomped out, essentially.
Yeah.
And that's quite a time to be
Yes.
enduring that kind of, it was like under 5 different kings or something like that, like 5 different emperors.
Exactly, at least, yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's quite a length of time. And I think, one of the things I love about those stories is it's very Ethiopia. It came from Ethiopia. This is not an outside anything. This was like a homegrown criticism and critical theory and critical thinking that evolved. And I think that there are seeds in there to explore. They're very worthwhile exploring and can contribute to conversation today, I think, with what to do in the future.
Very true. So actually, even in terms of technological, innovation, they were trying to solve, they were in a problem-solving mode in terms of, at least I think I heard in Maryam Debo, one of the churches that are attributed to them, there is still something that you can see from that 500 years ago. They tried to do an oil mill, extracting oil and so on. Actually, one of the kings, I think it was King, maybe after Zara Yacob died, a couple of, kings came, and then one of them, of course, he questioned them about this heretics and stuff and so on, and they said nothing and so on. So he was impressed with their innovation. So he had to ask them to build in central Ethiopia, to build for him a flour mill. So at that time, of course, the church people and others, they were saying this is something, satanic, magic, and so on. So they faced, all kinds of prosecution because of even the technological they had.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that. No, but I know, they, because of their ideas around critical thinking, and I think there was a tendency to try to innovate in take what you have and work it for better.
Exactly.
For sure, it's political.
And I don't know if you must be familiar now, given that for those who came late, who joined us late, Joan identified here as Tigray.
Yes.
Tigrayan.
I mean, and Canadian, and both. But
Exactly. Yeah. So given that, I'm also reminding them, but also I want to use it for my next question, where in Tigrinya and even in Amharic, we have Antu or so. When you are elder and so on, you are addressed differently, even if it's the same, gender and so on, right? So this, that would be, I think, the last question or the last reflection on them. So one of the things that went into the details of the dispute with the king was they were calling him, you as
right. Yes.
as singular, right?
Yeah.
Or as just yang, or as ordinary.
Yeah.
So he was insisting on that as well. So their clarification was, we call God, you are single and with no, difference in terms of authority or respect and so on. So they were, I mean, speaking to power. Imagine if we could build on that,
Exactly.
where we would have even the gender issues.
Yeah.
There was an argument actually when they went to the palace. Uh, somebody was questioning them, and they were answering, from the scripture and so on. And he was trying to just undermine their answer, and he was saying this is something that just a house lady would answer, they said.
Yeah.
And they didn't let that pass. They pointed to that, except for, at least according to church, except for the something related to the holy mass, to the clergy.
Yeah, the priests.
It's the same.
Yeah.
You can just say house lady or this and so on. So
Yeah.
so they were ahead of their time, in many ways.
This is true. Yeah, and inspiring. It's very inspiring to look back. And
Exactly.
you think of how long ago that was and what they
Yeah,
were doing.
500 years ago. You see, it's a big difference. So one thing that again related to who you are, what you did in relation to your connection, was Maryam Dengalat. So you went to Maryam Dengalat, and we know Maryam Dengalat to be one of the first massacres that happened, or at least we knew as early as January 13th. So I just want to play a very just a short clip, and then you walk us through that. And we have beautiful images that you brought out today. I was so happy that you already documented part of that. So this is your interview with you can tell us who he is and so on. So just
sure.
Go ahead.
You're ready. Yeah. So he's so in Maryam Dengalat, if you're familiar with it, there's a church that's up in the rocks. What happened was it's a part of the rock face of the church fell years ago, like several centuries ago, and the church became inaccessible. So they created another church below it, and that's the one that was kind of reported about on the news. But there is an older church, a much older church. I think it was. I think the tradition is something like it's the 5th or 6th century when that original church was built. Yeah, that's it. The one that's up high there. Yeah, so there it became very inaccessible. In 2005, there was a Canadian scholar who was able to go inside for the first time, and the elder that I'm interviewing is the one who went in with him, the Canadian scholar. But more recently, these pictures are from 2019, and it's because just in 2019, for the first time in 400 years, they said, a priests went up into the church and held a mass, and they took these photos. They really documented some of the items that they found in there. It was quite a process to get up there. They had to, they brought some experts in. It's not open to the public. They don't intend it to ever be open to the public. So these are photos of when the priests actually went up for the first time. When they got on, there's like bird remnant because birds have been in there for like 3 days. They had to like scrape remnant off of everything. But then what they found was just they found things like, again, nobody's been in here except for that one professor and the elder that I'm interviewing for 400 years. And they found pottery from China.
Wow.
Yeah. They found old illuminated Bibles. They found some other items. I can't remember what was there. And then these beautiful frescoes, these that are they believe that they are 1,000 years old at least, the art on the walls, and the color in them is really spectacular still. It's remarkable how well preserved they are. And there's a Stephanos up there, which is interesting too, because talking about his
exactly.
It's funny because people, I said earlier that like he's considered a heretic, but he or by some anyways, or he was considered to a certain extent. But I always heard him spoken about with reverence in the Agame region. There was a real sense that he was someone to be treasured, and I think the fact that you see him in here from 400 years ago, 1,000, whatever, but some of these, it's quite something.
Even Joanne, in my earlier show on the EMD media game, there was one question because I came to discover that recently. So there was one question that we asked where which of these churches related to the Dekika Stephanos or the Stephanites is the most recent one. So I gathered that there is a new church that was just built maybe 5 years ago in near Dagahamus under the name of Abuna Stephanos.
I heard something about that from a friend.
Yeah. So I think the heretics narrative is only limited to central Ethiopia or mainstream.
Because I heard it, but I definitely was not my experience in Tigray.
Exactly. And this one, actually, the second one to him is he's famous, one of the Dek Stephanos. So this is Abkarazun. The Gunda Gunda. Actually, it says they give him the Gunda Gunda Stephanos, and then you have the Abkarazun, the one of I think he's the next one, the next leader of that monastery after Stephanos. And even there is another one that attracted my attention. People are discussing about that as well. This is the Abuna Takla Haymanot. Abuna Takla Haymanot, the way it's depicted in the Ethiopian churches without, legs and even and with wings, angelic wings, and so on. So if this is maybe, as you mentioned, at least 500 years old, there could be some indication of to how he's represented in other contexts as well.
Yeah.
So you took this picture, or they took it?
No, these are not taken by me. This was by, there's a team. Actually, I think this came from. So I'll post this after our interview. But there's a short French documentary about this experience. It's in French, but it's still the visuals are stunning. The process of opening up the church, the priests going. I don't have rights to that or anything, but these pictures came from a friend who was instrumental in organizing this whole event. So they were taken by someone else. I wasn't not part of the
author of the paper, this book, no.
Sorry, what is? Oh, the ancient churches of Tigray.
I don't know if this is the same author, but this is an ancient church of Tigray book that was written, I think, maybe 10 years ago. One question that's coming to you live is here. If you have books documenting the stories that we are talking about in Maryam Dengalat.
I might be able to find a couple of titles, but I don't know any off the top of my head. I do know somebody who would probably know. I find that a lot of what I learned over the years is through elders telling me, so there's a lot of oral learning that I have done over the years, more than reading. Partly also because I don't read I don't speak Amharic or Tigrinya. Well, nishte my Tigrinya, so very, very, very little. And so yeah, because I can't read it. I know there are some more written in those languages.
Maybe we expect you to write one then.
What's that?
We might expect to for you to write, this book.
To write one of the books.
Yes. Yeah.
Right, after all of the years. And one of the things, I started a project called the Elders of Agame, which is what this is why I interviewed this elder. One of the things about Agame I find is that it has been used as such a disparaging term for so long. There by many sides, many people, they sort of look down on it, use it almost as like a way, to diminish somebody. And I think it's incredibly uneducated. If you know the history of the Agame region, it's one to be celebrated. There's a beautiful traditional tradition and history. It's a unique place. And I really wanted to counter some of those narratives by interviewing some of the elders and preserving some of their knowledge. And so I interviewed 5 elders with their stories. They spoke obviously in Tigrinya, and I had an interpreter that was there with me while I was interviewing them. But since coming home from those interviews, what I've needed is somebody to help subtitle. So all people who are out there, if you speak Tigrinya and are interested in learning how to subtitle, I will teach you. And you can help me subtitle this in order to, I really want it to be distributed to a wider audience. I think it's important that we're able to talk about these stories and locally, but also, to challenge the narratives that exist in a broader sense as well. English, being able to subtitle in English, it helps me, but it helps many other people as well better understand the unique contributions of these regions. So so this was one of the interviews.
Awesome. So those who are following us on YouTube or Facebook, you have the call. So if you want to support this very important work to go out and be shared to people, help with subtitling from Tigrinya to English.
Contact me on Twitter.
Yes, on Twitter. Yeah, I will show that account later. Okay. So maybe I want to ask you about what stood out in this interview on Maryam Dengalat. So let me just play it for play, and then we'll take it from there. Okay.
ካልኣይ ናይ ቤተ ክርስቲያን ንዋየ ቅድሳት ዝሕልዋ ደማሙ ነይረን ለተን ደማሙ ርስቲ ነይርዎን ገራቱ ዓቕምና ገንዘብ ስለተሓተተና ክንውፅእ ንኽእልና እዩ ብግልፂ ኣብዚ ቦታ ዘለና ከይነደራደር ድማ ከጥፍዎ ስለዝኽእሉ ምናልባት ካብ ወለዶ ናብ ወለዶ ታሪክ እናሓለፈ ፀኒሑ ዝመፀሉ ምክንያት ወይ ከዓ ናይ መንግስቲ ዓቕሚ ሙዚ ኤጀንሲ ባህልና ቱሪዝምን ምንቅስቃስ ስለ ዘሎ also that I was coming to this معلم سينويك بملؤ استقلال دوريا ملاش كم لما زي مزلهم تحت هذا السري كم أسس عليه it's all painted أنت سئل ودي عجنيهم كن وصل عمو سئلنا بنت الناس كنا نقول كل اللي نرنا قصص رزقنا ولا خلينا يوم الله الله تحكي تعمل كم سب
here something that attracted my attention was he was mentioning about what they found out, like you were mentioning, when they opened it up for the first time, I think after 400 years. So he mentioned about a painting that was not in good shape, and they asked, if they can take it and repair it and so on. But he said because it's a heritage, it can't leave the place, or they kept it there. So I know this is not maybe fully translated yet. But was there anything that stood out for you at that time? As part of what you know about Maryam Dengalat?
Yeah, I think at least the anecdotal stories of the length of the history of the site, I think, is quite something. They're talking about this being an important site for a very long history. And the richness, I think that is there in their oral storytelling of the significance of the site. I think that kind of stood out to me. I was expecting, I didn't know what I was expecting, but maybe not quite that length. Whenever we talk about things going back almost to like pre-Christendom times and things like that, it's like this is a very long tradition and storytelling, like a history to be recalling. And I think, you know, one of the other things I was just thinking in relation to some of this is Maryam Dengalat, I think, you know, at least right now in our minds, is a place of a great massacre, and rightfully so, because it's horrific what happened there, and we need to document, address it. People need to be held accountable already. You know, we've been doing this for 4 to 6 months into this. The fact that the people are not being held accountable for the crimes that are being committed on a daily basis is atrocious. And the government needs to mobilize those resources. But there's one of the things about, you know, about all of this is that I think being able to tell stories about this church, being able to tell stories about the people who live in the valley, the farmers who live there, showing what life is like. It also shows what's lost, you know, when who it is that's being oppressed, who it is that is being targeted. And I think when you understand the humanity and can connect with the humanity and appreciate the value of these spaces and these people, then you are more inclined to move and address the atrocities that are being committed. And I think we really need, as great as, and I'm really proud of how the Tigray community has rallied together and, you know, and protested, and the social media presence is really something. I resurrected my Twitter account, which was dead because of to join that movement. But at the same time, we need to reach wider audiences, I think, and build allies continue to build allies and relationships with, you know, perhaps other social justice movements that are also powerful in today's culture, ones that, you know, we can cross-reference. And so I think that, you know, being able to mobilize people, you know, I feel like we should never underestimate the power of an individual, and being able to mobilize other activists and other to continue to advocate and care for Tigray, I think is a valuable strategy. And to do that, I think we need to continue telling these stories of what we're missing, what we're losing, what's being oppressed, who's being oppressed, and
very, very important, I guess. We have been talking for an hour now, and there are a lot of things to cover. But this is not the last. This is only the first conversation we will have about Tigray, about Agame, about you know, all these interesting things, and of course about the advocacy that we are in. Maybe one last question from me, and I will also give you an opportunity to, you know, say whatever should be said, maybe and left out because of missing from my side. So how do you see the international community's response so far, and specifically Canadian government, because we both are in Canada right now. And you were mentioning about how the Tigrayan community, with no experience of actually, you know, advocacy over the last 30 years, suddenly, you know, rose to the moment and is doing a great job. But I totally agree in terms of reaching out to other communities within Ethiopia, outside Ethiopia, one individual at a time, and so on. So just I would appreciate if you can reflect on the international community response so far.
Yeah, well, Canada has been so incredibly disappointing. When I think about how Canada, wanted a seat on the Security Council a few years ago, and they campaigned based on one of the things they used in their campaign was the Responsibility to Protect Act. That they had is a non-binding agreement, but these countries would try to prevent genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, things like that from happening. And then to be in a position where Tigray is suffering so greatly, and we knew how bad it was in January. It was coming out. There were enough reports to know in January and February the extent of this devastation. So I found their response really lacking, very disappointing. And I'm a liberal myself, but this federal government I feel like they dropped the ball with this. And I think they don't even realize, just this week I was encouraged, obviously, with the ambassador finally coming out and making a stronger statement, but it was just glacially slow, the response to the one-sidedness of much of the atrocities that were happening, calling out the Eritreans for existing in the conflict. They're very slow. So and also, side note, comparatively, look at Ireland, who won the seat on the Security Council, and what they've done. They've been a much stronger advocate for Tigray. So, I think that they're now that they have come out and at least said something in relation to the conflict, to try to identify the blame a little bit more. I don't know. We'll see what happens, but I think that we need to. I appreciated he's the director. His name is skipping my mind. The director of the Norwegian Refugee Council. He talked about needing an L3 scale up of diplomacy, like an emergency scale up of diplomacy. And so we're looking to our nations. I really appreciated that quote because I think it's true. That's a huge push that we need. And so we have to continue lobbying our diplomats and advocating for them to intervene and to show them why it is that we want them to intervene, and that we're invested in it. So I'm very disappointed with Canada's response. I understand, that there's in some ways a bit of a precedent that was set internationally with Syria. There were atrocities happening in Syria. There were people saying you have to intervene, and we didn't. And, so it's a difficult position. I do understand that for the international community, but, what does it mean when you don't, for Canada, for example, to not stand up? We espouse values of equality, women's rights, and then turn away from an enormous suffering at this capacity. What does that say about your reputation, what it is that you espouse to believe, to not address it appropriately? And I don't think that I think that we are going to continue to document what's happening in Tigray. And I think when it is fully documented and there is a full understanding of what's happened, we're all going to be questioning what our states did and did not do, what our politicians did and did not do. And they may not realize yet that they will likely be held to account for their inaction early on.
Yeah, actually, no, I was, like you said, I was myself surprised how Canada reacted or not reacted, given that with the feminist, global affairs, feminist direction, I'm also, I voted for liberals, for Trudeau, and I'm a big fan in terms of climate change policies compared to what we had before. All that. So my disappointment is beyond words, and so on. So I can't even fathom, what the reason is, why, and so on. So, but you are mentioning now Syria. So I was not following how Canada reacted at that time. So.
Well, yeah, I just mean in the sense the international community was sort of there were people really being oppressed in Syria very violently, and the world did not intervene. We instead brought Syrian refugees here, and look, if that's a precedent, then let's bring Tigrayan refugees also here. There's an opportunity to do something like that, at least to support the individuals who left the fighting. And Syria has had such a long war now. It's over 10 years. So and there's a real chance of the state, well, potential of the state of Ethiopia crumbling, right? Possibly. There's such a powder keg of problems at the moment. So who knows where the future lies, but yeah, I think that it's disappointing for sure. And I think that Canada, one of the things that complicated the situation was earlier in 2020, Trudeau had a much touted meeting with Abiy Ahmed, and they were planning new economic sort of partnerships, and so just a few months later, like that was the spring of 2020. So for a few months later to have to turn around and potentially criticize somebody that you're trying to establish new connections with is difficult. It's a difficult decision. But at the same time, that's what I'm saying, is that by the time January and February came around and we knew what was happening, there's no excuse. There's no reason. There's no reason to not be.
Even if you look at the G7, statement where Canada is part of that, and it was clear about everything, about Eritrea, about the atrocities, about weaponized rape, and so on. So a strong statement coming where Canada is part of a group, and you are part of that statement, and you share away. But anyway, like you said, it's complicated, and but the bottom line, what I like about what you said is we continue to do that. We push that, we document that, and so on. So it might be a matter of time before Canada and others join. I mean, I'm happy with that, what the European Union, European countries have been doing from the get-go, from recognizing it, pushing it, and so on. And the US hopefully is also on board. Maybe, before I, the last question in terms of what you want to say in Tigrinya, if possible. I'm just giving you some second thing about that. I want to share your account here for those specifically, if you want, which would be much appreciated, to help with subtitling the amazing footage that Joanne has on Maryam Dengalat, Gunda Gundo, everything Tigray, and related to her heritage as well. Please contact her. I don't know if you can see it from here, from there, but you can contact as well UMD Media, and then I will be connecting you with Joanne. ክትሕግዝዋ ትደልዩ ብትግርኛ ዶክመንት ዝተገበረ ናብ እንግሊዝኛ ሰብታይትል ብምግባር please contact Joanne or contact UMD Media or myself, and I will connect you. ስለዚህ, and finally, Joanne, anything you want to say in English that I didn't ask you about for today, and then some statements to Tigray in Tigrinya.
What else do you think? I'm not going to attempt Tigrinya. It's a good try. I'm not going to do it. I would say, I guess, we will preserve Tigrayan values. We will preserve our culture. We will continue to share our beautiful, distinct heritage. We will broadcast and celebrate our history. Tigray and Tigrayans will continue. For those who are there, I would say, to remember that you are not alone. You are not forgotten. You are enduring trauma, but, talk with your loved ones and remind yourself of your history and your identity. The diaspora and its friends, I think will continue to love and care and advocate for Tigray throughout this. And we will also be there to pick up the pieces and build it back together. So whenever this is all over, it really doesn't matter if it's like over tomorrow or it's over in 20 years, Tigray will continue. So I would say, look to your history. And if you don't know it, seek out your elders and ask them. And they are so full of wisdom. So Tigray has done this many times before, and it will rise again.
Great. That's a very good way of ending this. And I just want to say 2 words with you in Tigrinya. Tigray تسعر. Can you say that? Tigray تسعر.
Tigray تسعر.
That is, Tigray will win, will be victorious. Excellent. That's the motto of the slogan of the day. Yeah. And I want to personally say to you, Ajohnaina. Ajohnaina means keep going, ours. You are ours. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you as my guest today. And this will be the first, not the last. And enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for watching today's show. My show today was my conversation with Joanne Hodges, a Canadian Tigrayan woman, I must say, with Tigray Royal Heritage. We talked about her heritage and lineage in Tigray and on the war on Tigray, of course. And we'll have other guests coming up this week. Professor Shetul Trumbull is one of them coming up. Please, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, YouTube channel, please subscribe, share and like on our Facebook page and on YouTube channel as well. Your host today was Getachew Asafa. That was all for today. Have a good one.